You know the face. It appears on banners at anti-war protests, on college dorm room flags, and printed across cheap tourist merchandise all over the world. Ernesto Che Guevara dedicated his life to the absolute destruction of global capitalism. Yet today, his face is a high-volume commercial asset, sold for profit on every continent. Many people wearing that face associated with vague notions of peace, equality, or harmless rebellion. But the historical Ernesto Guevara was a rigid Marxist commander who believed entirely in total, violent, armed conflict. To understand how a ruthless guerrilla fighter became a context-free avatar for rebellion, we have to look past the t-shirt and examine the life he actually lived. In the early 1950s, Guevara was an Argentine medical student. He spent his 20s crossing Latin America on a motorcycle, encountering severe poverty, mining camps, and leper colonies. Through these travels, Latin America stopped being a collection of countries in his mind. It became a single, massive, open wound. Then, in 1954, he found himself in Guatemala. He watched the United States engineer a coup to remove Jacobo Arbenz, a democratically elected president who had tried to redistribute land to the rural poor. That event cemented a rigid belief in his mind. He concluded any attempt at peaceful reform within a capitalist system would always be crushed by those in power. Only total, armed struggle could succeed. Guevara traveled to Mexico and joined Castro's expedition, not as a soldier, but as the group's medic. But for Guevara, the two roles were now inseparable. He began to view the rifle as a surgical tool, necessary to cut out the political causes of poverty he once only treated with medicine. When Castro's small band of rebels landed in a Cuban mangrove swamp in 1956, they were ambushed and almost entirely wiped out. Wounded in the chaos, Guevara faced a choice between grabbing a box of medical supplies or a box of ammunition. He grabbed the ammunition. During 2 years in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, Guevara earned a reputation for fierce discipline and ideological rigidity. He rose from a medic to a top commander, leading his troops with an uncompromising demand for order and a personal fearlessness under fire. When the revolution won in January 1959, Castro put Guevara in charge of the La Cabaña Fortress. It served as both a prison and a courtroom for members of the old regime. As chief judge of appeals, he oversaw revolutionary tribunals. Under his watch, dozens, and by several estimates hundreds, of men were sent to the firing squad. These were summary proceedings, lacking any conventional legal defense. Guevara never expressed regret for these executions. He openly described state violence in the service of the revolution as a grim necessity, something that had to be done without flinching. This historical record sits in stark contrast to his modern reputation. The man who ran those tribunals was an authoritarian who prioritized ideological purity and swift execution over basic human rights. He soon grew restless working behind a desk as a government minister. By 1965, he resigned his Cuban citizenship, determined to export his model of warfare globally. This map illustrates his FOCO theory. A tiny, isolated vanguard group, represented by this red dot in Bolivia, could trigger a continental uprising. But reality broke that theory. Local peasants were hostile, and the CIA-advised Bolivian army quickly closed in on his starving forces. Wounded and exhausted, he was captured in a ravine and executed the next day in a dirt-floor schoolhouse. He was 39 years old. As a military strategist, his final campaign was a complete failure. 7 years before his execution, a photographer named Alberto Corda had snapped a quick picture of Guevara staring into the distance at a memorial service. The newspaper didn't even publish it. It sat in a drawer. Right after his death in 1967, an Italian publisher got a hold of a print, cropped it, and turned it into a poster. Student protest movements erupting from Paris to Mexico City in 1968 adopted the image instantly. They stripped away the specific, violent history of the Cuban Revolution, compressing all of that youth and grief into a single, stark icon of pure defiance. Today, those deep contradictions remain entirely unresolved. In Cuba, he is treated as a state saint. To historians and exiles, he is a murderous authoritarian. and to much of the global left, he is a fashionable emblem of resistance. The debate over who he really was will likely never be settled, but in a way, the image outlived the argument. By becoming a universal grammar for the idea that the powerless can stand up against the powerful, the ghost achieved a reach that the gorilla never could.